Okay guys, in our last video we talked about fertilizers and the components of fertilizers and how fertilizers can make things grow so big and so pretty, but at the same time you also have to understand that there is an issue with fertilizers and the overuse of fertilizers that begin to happen throughout improper use. And improper use basically means overusing fertilizers in this case, and most of the time that's what leads to these problems. And right now you're seeing 3 articles, either from PubMed or the National Institute of Health, the NIH, or some other research kind of publication where it talks about the health problems that are associated with fertilizer use and really over fertilizing soils and plant material and so forth, because too much fertilizer can be a bad thing, Martha Stewart. That's the thing. So the first article, excessive use of nitrogenous fertilizers and unawareness causing serious threats to the environment and to human health. The second one, reducing the health impacts of the nitrogen problem. So that tells us right there, nitrogen's going to be an issue. And then the third one, investigation of an effect of chemical fertilizers on the environment. So I want you to keep in mind that these are just 3 snapshots, 3 headliners, 3 articles that are all pushed out by independent somewhat. I mean, everybody's got, some money that's getting fed to them to support some narrative. But PubMed, National Institute of Health, these are not coming from, let's burn everything to the ground. Let's not trust the big man. That's not what these are. So what are some of these problems that these articles address and they talk about? Number one, they're going to talk about soil degradation. So basically what's happening is that people are over-fertilizing to a point that they are beginning to change the chemical makeup in a way of the soil that plant material is grown in. And one of the largest things that get changed here, because it's nitrogenous based, is going to be the pH levels. So the soil begins to impact its own and adjust itself, and all of this extra that's getting added to the soil, it weirds it out to a point where it doesn't know what to do with all the extras anymore, and we begin to change the pH level of the soil. Then what happens is that a domino effect begins to take place, and if we are fertilizing crops, not necessarily pretty, beautiful little flowering plants that, make my life really happy in the mornings when I see them, if these are like corn and wheat and, orchids or orchards of, not orchids are the flowering plants, but orchards of apples or oranges and so forth, these can actually reduce crop yields. So if you're not very careful with the fertilizers, you can over-fertilize to a point that you begin to negatively impact the soil. You don't benefit the soil in any form or fashion. And because of that, that is now dominoing effect down into the crops or maybe even the flowers that you're trying to grow, that you're trying to produce, that you're trying to sell or use in some form or in some fashion. Next up is water pollution. That's also going to be a thing for over-fertilization. So too much nitrogen goes into the system, and too much nitrogen, what if the soil doesn't absorb all of it? What if a really hard rain comes in? Where does that go? Well, this is runoff, and that runoff has to go somewhere, and that runoff can go into lakes, and that runoff can go into slow-moving streams. And what begins to happen is that it creates what we call dead zones. And these dead zones are basically decaying plant material, and then algae begins to bloom and it depletes all of the oxygen out of the water because of all that algae, and things that live in the water begin to die because they actually do need oxygen in order to live, for many of them. So water pollution begins to be a problem. Dead zones are getting created from over fertilizing when it's not necessarily necessary. And then number 4, anhydrous ammonia can increase the risk of cancer, some of the studies are showing. So if you're out and about and you are using the anhydrous form, so these are solid fertilizers in a bag, which is really what most people buy. Very few people are actually purchasing the liquid fertilizer that's already in solution that you're spraying on stuff. You are taking powders and you are dissolving those powders. That is the anhydrous form of these fertilizers. So the anhydrous forms of the ammonia that can get generated will increase risk of cancer. So too much fertilizer, again, is a bad thing for the soil, but too much fertilizer exposure to you can also be a bad thing as well. Next up, it can also lead to genetic mutations. That's something that was kind of recently found. And these genetic mutations are taking place really at an early age, especially with pregnancies and so forth. So you want to be really careful with those, handling fertilizers, utilizing the fertilizers. You just don't want these, of course, things to happen to you just because you simply want to fertilize a rose bush. Now, normal circumstances, on a regular kind of use, as long as you are protecting yourself and not bathing in it and not overusing it in some form or fashion, you're going to be okay. But long-term exposures over years and years worth of this stuff is shown. Cancer has shown genetic mutations. But here's the last one. Even sometimes shorter use of these fertilizers, if they're heavy in nitrogen, can also trigger Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and ADHD. So really, again, it's all about how you use it. Are you protecting yourself the proper way? Yes, I know it's a fertilizer, but are you reading the directions? Because I guarantee you it will say, you know, sometimes wear gloves when handling, or wash and rinse your hands thoroughly after you get finished measuring it out or using it. So don't go in barehanded and grab stuff, especially if you're fertilizing stuff on a week-to-week basis and it's a common thing that you're doing throughout the time. You just want to take the safety little extra, and these nitrogenous bases, especially if they are in the anhydrous form and your fertilizer has high nitrogen content, can be a problem if you're not very careful. So, problems with health, problems with the environment, all over the place. And again, as long as you are acting okay and decent with it, and, you know, fertilizing it, every little whipstitch here and there, just don't drink it and don't take a bath in it, and I think that you'll be okay. But keep in mind, these articles are out there, and I guarantee you there will be more, and I guarantee you that they will find more connections over a course of time when this begins to kind of take off and become more mainstream. Now, in the last video, I said, finally, we got to talk about TKN. What is TKN? Oh, I know. Pick me. That means total Kjeldahl nitrogen, right? TKN, total Kjeldahl nitrogen. Why is he saying this over and over and over? I wonder if that's going to be a quiz question. Maybe. All right, so TKN, total Kjeldahl nitrogen. And I told you that it comes from Mr. Kjeldahl himself. All right, so up here in the top right-hand side is Mr. Kjeldahl. You're going to see him in the middle with the very handsome mustache. Let's see. Mr. Kjeldahl right here is where he's at. And Mr. Kjeldahl is a chemist, and he started to do studies a little bit, 1949 to 1900. That was his born and birth date, by the way, not when he was doing his studies. So he actually passed away at a very young age. But even so, during this short 50-year stint of his life, he came up with a procedure, and this procedure was called the Kjeldahl method. And the Kjeldahl method was named after him because he was the one that kind of made it a forefront. And he worked mainly in the food industry. That's kind of how this all got started. So he was focused more on protein work and a little bit of food chemistry that went along with the studies and the tests that he needed to do. So this was an easy way for him to do a test, use a little bit of glassware, use a lab method, use a setup in order to achieve the results that he was after. And what he was after was really protein. And proteins are made up of nitrogen. All proteins have nitrogen on the inside. I mean, it's one of the things that make them a protein. So, in other words, proteins are really made up of something called amino acids. All right, AMINO-ACIDs. All proteins, every single protein is made up of amino acids. They might be different amino acids. It might be a different proportion of amino acids. It might be a different order of amino acids because these things connect like a train, one to one to one to one to one, and make a big old huge unit. But they are amino acids. And amine, guess what? Ding, 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 Amine is kind of like the word amide, and an amine is a NH2 group. That's what that is. So the little NH2 groups that were hanging off of urea, those, if they were just NO2 only or NH2 only, and that was it, just NH2, we would refer to that as the amine group. That amine group is attached to a carbonyl group. That's the C double bond O. And then when an amine attaches to a carbonyl, that entire thing is called the amide. So, see, okay, I kind of get it now, right, in a roundabout way. So this is how Mr. Kjeldahl got his start. And what you're seeing in the picture down below is the first Kjeldahl setup that was being done at that moment. So what you're finding is that the Kjeldahl actually includes a couple of parts. Number one, this is what I'm going to abbreviate as the K flask. This is what we would actually call the Kjeldahl flask, because this is kind of the unique piece that is not quite used yet, at least in the course, until you do the Kjeldahl experiment. But all the other pieces and parts are kind of traditionally there in some of the other common lab methods. So the Kjeldahl flask, or the K flask, is one of the things that makes this thing work the proper way. So if you look at the K flask, you're going to see two entry points. Well, one really an entry and one an exit. So this looks like a huge big metal bottle, and this metal bottle has a line that feeds out from the side, and that line goes down into the K flask. Well, this was actually filled with water back in the day, and this is like our hot plate, or what we would use maybe in this course is like a heating mantle and a variac. This is a heat source. So what was happening at this time is that water was getting heated up, almost like a steam distillation, and that water was getting kind of steamed, and that really hot steam now is getting fed up and out into that container, and that hot steam goes into the K flask, which begins to heat up that solution that's contained on the inside. Now, what is inside of that flask, we'll talk about a little bit later, but at least this is our starting point. So that's point number one. So as this begins to heat, what happens is that sooner or later, the nitrogen that is in a sample, whatever form that nitrogen might be in a roundabout way, but that nitrogen hopefully is going to be converted over to a usable form for the experiment. Again, I'll talk about that in just a minute, but that nitrogen is getting prepared and that nitrogen is getting released. Then what happens is that that nitrogen is going to turn into a vapor, and it's going to fill this flask, and some distillation is going to eventually take place, but digestion has to happen first. So digestion is this idea that we need to heat a sample for typically a very long period of time. This could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, it could be 3 hours, who knows? But as you can imagine, the time that it takes to digest samples really eat away a lot of people's time, and they don't really like this too much. So there's been improvement areas upon the digestion of samples, and again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But is there a way that we can shorten this? Is there a way that we don't have to wait as long? And my answer is yes, of course there is, but we don't have one, and that's because they're super expensive, and for the times that we need to use it, it's just not going to pay out in our end. So we'll just bite the bullet kinda, and we'll just be like, oh, okay, well, I'll just have to wait around here for 24 hours before I leave for the day in order for the Kjeldahl to get finished. Not that long, but you get my drift. All right. So after the digestion period is over, then what will happen is that reagents will be added into the K flask, and then those reagents will begin to fully release. Poof! Up it goes. And that is ammonia, NH3. So we are going to end up generating ammonia gas. And this is not surprising, because in a previous video, I told you that something like urea can actually break down and it can release ammonia over a course of time. And that concentration of nitrogen can change. Well, if it can do that just naturally, then why can't we do that as well in a lab? And that's exactly what goes on here. But I also said that things like ammonium ammonium nitrate doesn't quite do this as easily. So is something like ammonium nitrate, can that actually be measured? Can that actually be Kjeldahled in order to find the nitrogen content? So again, I'll mention that in a little bit. Next up, after the ammonia poof goes up and out, you're going to see that gas eventually go, what is this called? Ding, 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 ding. That's right, this is a condenser. So this West condenser is the same as any old West condenser that you have used so far in the course, and you're seeing that the West condenser will do what the condenser is supposed to do, and that is cold water in from the bottom and cold water out from the top. So that way we can insert the cold water or cooler water and push it up and through the West condenser and out the other end. So that way all of this stuff can stay as cold as possible, and fills up the glassware in doing so. So that ammonia gas is going to condense, and then what will happen is that it will drip, 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 drip down into my collection flask. And in this collection flask, I'm going to have typically some type of solution that's already going to be here. So the West condenser needs a drip adapter, and that is what this piece is. So again, depending on the labs that you've done so far, you might have used a drip adapter and a West condenser already, and if so, great news, this is the same thing. There's no difference, so you're already a step ahead of everybody else. And that West condenser, though a little different, has to be submerged down into this liquid solution that's in the collection flask. And the reason is because ammonia is a gas, and I want that ammonia to be freed. I want that ammonia to get generated, but I want to capture that ammonia. And if that drip adapter is not in solution, what will happen is that that ammonia gas, as it begins to drip out of this drip adapter, it's going to see this, and if it does not immediately go into solution, it's just going to go whoop, up and out, and I'm not going to collect it, I'm not going to capture it, it's not going to be measured, and I'm going to report a phony number. So that's one of the things that people forget to do here, because that is not a natural feeling to do. So that tip of the drip adapter does have to go in solution, and the reason is because you have to capture and catch the ammonia. Otherwise, it's going to slip through your fingers and it's going to sneak out the front door, and it's never going to come back because it's going to go out and party all night and then call you days and days and days later and say, "Mom, can you come and bail me out of jail? I got in trouble." And there's no bailing out here in this class. So if you don't get ammonia, ammonia never comes back, and it's not even welcome through our doors. All right, so in other words, this Kjeldahl method actually is, for the most part, suited for anything that contains nitrogen, because if it does contain nitrogen, that ammonia hopefully will get released in some form or fashion, and we will capture that and we can measure that. So you are finding Kjeldahl in many areas of laboratory work. You're finding it in the water and wastewater fields, so it's got an environmental spin on it. So a lot of times when they process water or when they process wastewater, this is a test that they would like to do just to kind of keep track of everything that is remaining in those solutions before they pump it back out into the rivers or the streams or into your faucet and so forth. So Kjeldahl is not something that's uncommon in a working environmental laboratory. Next up, food and beverage is also another thing that uses Kjeldahl quite heavily. And the reason is because they're not necessarily after nitrogen, but nitrogen corresponds to amino acids, and amino acids correspond to protein, and protein is very often included on nutrition labels. So whether it's something that you're drinking or whether it's on something that you're eating, there's probably some protein that's related to it in some form or fashion. Where did they get those numbers on the nutrition label? Well, protein can easily be calculated under the right circumstances using something like the Kjeldahl process. So if we can take a food item such as milk, or such as a protein shake, or such as a piece of cheese, or such as a piece of chicken, or a piece of hamburger meat, if we can process that in Kjeldahl, we can destroy that food item, and we can release the ammonia gas that is trapped within, and that's all coming from the protein, and that ammonia can be trapped and can be measured on the back end of a Kjeldahl. And that is how those grams of protein get applied onto some of these nutrition labels. It is a staple, it is an original method, and it still really exists. If you look at current AOAC methods and so forth, you're going to find Kjeldahl still listed for a user, so that way they can do them. Finally, agriculture is listed, and agriculture would be more like fertilizers, but they can also be things like animal food product as well. That somewhat goes under agriculture too at the same time. So the USDA gets involved a little bit here, but also anything that is food related for a pig, for a horse, for a cow, for a chicken, all of that is agriculture based as well. So those food products or feed stuffs can go into a Kjeldahl, and you can actually calculate protein content that you were giving an animal in their food, just like you can, of course, with a human. Agriculture, at the same time, though, is also going to include things like fertilizers that we are spraying all over our fields, acres and acres of it maybe, and maybe they want to dig up some soil, and maybe they want to bring that soil sample into the lab, and maybe they want to process that soil sample to look for how much nitrogen is currently in that soil sample. And if so, Kjeldahl could work for them. So as you can see, very universal. It takes commonplace in many different areas of laboratory work, and for the most part, not terribly expensive to set up and run, because much of this glassware is already located in a working lab anyway. So, if you want a better picture of Mr. Kjeldahl, here is Mr. Kjeldahl. I want to assume that this could be over here to the right-hand side. That might be a little bit of the modification of a Kjeldahl flask back into the day. Kjeldahl flasks are notoriously known to have really long necks on them, and if I look at this picture, that for sure has a really long neck on it, and it looks like it's sitting in a pot that looks like a heating mantle, or something at least that's generating some heat. And it also shows two plugs up at the top, one coming in, probably one going out, and we've already talked about why that was a thing at the same time. So with that said, that could be the first Kjeldahl kind of variant flask that was done many years ago, and we just modified these. We made them a little bit smaller, made the necks a little bit longer, made them work with the glassware that we have, so that way we can still process this, but maybe process it a little easier. It's maybe not as bulky, maybe a little easier to handle and to use, but I think Mr. Kjeldahl will be proud of himself, knowing that many years later we're still talking about him and what he does. Now, keep in mind that TKN stands for total Kjeldahl nitrogen. It does not stand for total nitrogen, right? That's another misnomer that people have. So TKN is not TN, and TN is total nitrogen. That means nitrogen from all sources in every aspect of a sample. TKN is total Kjeldahl nitrogen. These are nitrogen sources that can be picked up and measured using the Kjeldahl process. And not all nitrogen sources can be kind of used in Kjeldahl or be picked up in Kjeldahl. So we got to figure out what's appropriate and what's not. What are we leaving out? What are some of the things that cannot be measured? But TKN, total Kjeldahl nitrogen, overall is basically ammonia, which is NH3. And that's mainly what we're generating from this reaction, and that's mainly what we're trying to capture in the reaction. So that's good news. It does work with ammonia, and it also works with much of the organic containing nitrogen. So if ammonia is present in the sample or a version that could lead to ammonia, these are fair game. And then organic nitrogen. So that would be something like urea, right? So this is not ammonia. It could generate ammonia, which is NH3. That's NH2 on that side and NH2 on that side. I'm getting silly here. It's late at night. No, not really. But, here's NH2 and there's NH2. All of it's just starting to run in together. All right, so there's a urea, and that urea contains nitrogen. It's not ammonia per se, but it can be heated. It can be reacted. We can generate ammonia from it. I mean, it naturally does this anyway, so we can kind of do that in the lab and replicate it as well. So any organic containing molecule that has nitrogen in it, all of those are fair game for Kjeldahl. And then straight up ammonia, or if it can make ammonia in some form or fashion, can also be classified as Kjeldahl nitrogen. And that is what TKN and this lab experiment is going to be measuring. But it does not include any nitrate or nitrite compound. So that's the problem here. Not all nitrogen can be picked up. So if I go back and I take a look at the NH4NO3, ammonium nitrate, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, well, wait a minute, that is not organic nitrogen because it's not really involved in an organic molecule. No, it's not. And it's not really ammonia, right? I mean, it's not NH3, nor can we produce NH3 from it really easily. So TKN is probably not going to measure nitrogen from ammonium nitrate unless, here's the kicker, unless we modify the Kjeldahl method in order to be able to process those samples. So there are different versions of Kjeldahl that's out there. You're going to be doing one of the versions of them, but different reagents can lead to different things. So if you know that you've got more stubborn type of nitrogens that are in the sample, then you can change up the reagents a little bit. The process overall is still the same, but you can change up the reagents and you can get these things to react and free up ammonia. And as long as they free up ammonia, that's all that matters. You're going to collect that, you're going to measure that, and that corresponds to how much was present in your sample. But for the most part, a basic Kjeldahl with no bells and whistles will have a really hard time measuring nitrates and nitrites that are in a sample unless they are coming from an ammonia type of source. So what this means is that this ammonium nitrate is a little more Kjeldahl friendly, because if I cleave this in half, there we go. This NH4 can be NH3 under the right conditions. It doesn't take a lot. And that NH3 can be total Kjeldahl because that's part of the definition. But the nitrogen that is containing inside of the nitrate piece, that's a little more difficult to measure. That is not getting released. That's not getting turned into a vapor. That's not getting inside the West condenser. That's not getting measured on the end result of this unless I completely destroy that nitrate and somehow convert that nitrate into ammonia gas, so that way we can pick those up on the back end and run them. Nitrites, which are NO2s, are going to be the same way. We can't use those pieces and expect that the Kjeldahl is going to be measuring those nitrogens in those halves of the molecules. But if it can be released in the form of maybe ammonia in some form or fashion, and many organic nitrogens can do that in a roundabout way, then we can pick those up, then we can measure those, then we can report on those. All right. So overall, what's happening here is that total nitrogen, this red bar at the top, this total nitrogen is all nitrogen across the board. If nitrogen is present, it's going to be counted, it's going to be included. That is not what total Kjeldahl measures. What total Kjeldahl nitrogen measures is the total Kjeldahlic form of nitrogen. That's different. So total nitrogen will include possibly nitrates if they are in the sample and nitrites if they are in the sample. Total Kjeldahl does not see either one of these. Those are marked out. Unless you modify them, unless you change the reagents, unless you do something special. Then there's a possibility that Kjeldahl maybe could release those, and then we could measure those in some form or fashion. We have other ways to measure those nitrogens, though. It doesn't have to be Kjeldahl. We can measure nitrates a certain way. We can measure nitrites a different way. I mean, not a big deal. We can do that in a lab. It's just not very Kjeldahl friendly. So total nitrogen is everything. And the Kjeldalic form of nitrogen that we're going to be focused on here is really the TKN half that is going to be focused on ammonia and the organic containing nitrogen that might be inside of the sample, which is perfectly fine. Not a big deal. All right. Keep in mind that total Kjeldahl was a piece of glassware. So we already talked about that. It looks something like this in the bottom right-hand corner. Couple of pieces of glassware connected together. Not a big deal. I mean, we've been there. We've done it. We feel pretty comfortable maybe with this already. But as you can imagine, people begin to hate this type of setup. If you got to do it over and over and over, it's not very convenient. You got to clean it. You got to wash it. It just takes up a lot of footprint as far on the bench top. So space is going to be an issue. So what we have really changed this into now, and we are not lucky to have one yet, but what we've changed the Kjeldahl into now is instrumentation. And that's really the name of our game. That's really kind of what we do now in a lab environment, learn how to use the equipment. So what you're seeing here is a new, updated, like 21st century version of total Kjeldahl here. I mean, that's what this is. So all the pieces and parts, though, are still there. The big flask that had the long neck is still present. We still generate ammonia. That's not an issue. I mean, that's still going on. That ammonia is getting released, and that ammonia goes through a condenser. That's not an issue either. It's still happening inside of the system that you're seeing here on the screen. And then that ammonia is still getting captured, and that ammonia is getting captured, and that ammonia can be titrated at the very end of this, and that also can be done by instrumentation. So really, it's more automated now. You get better results, you get better numbers, it's more convenient, it's more user-friendly. You can process more than one sample, really. Just load the batch up, walk off and leave it, come back hours later, and it will be finished, and it will store all of the data. It will generate the reports for you. It will do a lot of the work that you would have done if it was hands-on glassware driven the whole time. But what fun is that? Push a button and walk away? I want to go old school. Show me the Kjeldahl flask, and that's really what we're going to do. And for the labs that don't have this type of instrumentation that you're seeing here on the screen, they got to do it old school. They got to go with the K flask and process those manually, just like they did 100 years ago or longer. So these systems run anywhere between $50,000 to $75,000, and we just do Kjeldahl honestly 2 or 3 times in our program. So there's no really desperate need to have one of these to spend that much money on. We would rather have something else that we can do as far as instrumentation and general routine maintenance of laboratory tests that we do in the ChemTech program. TKN, though, very universal method, very precise, very reproducible. So it has all the bells and whistles that people look for. And again, nothing else really has replaced it as far as glassware and basic lab bench work, other than instrumentation that really is still based off of the Kjeldahl method. It is internationally recognized. So like I told you before, even the AOAC constantly refer to the TKN method, and you're finding it quite a bit in the food industry still. Nothing else has replaced it. It's one of the kind of the originals, the OGs of the laboratory test, and nothing has came around to work any better so far, especially in protein work and in food and beverage work. Used to assay what we call oils, wastewater, fertilizers, environmental samples. You will find those methods out there too. There could be modified versions of those, though, depending on what they are. Those samples are not as complex, believe it or not, as something like a food sample might be. And because of that, the cleanup of these samples are somewhat a little easier. And there's alternative ways that we can measure nitrogen content now versus the Kjeldahl only. And if the samples are friendly and we don't have to do a lot with them, and we can get nitrogen containing compounds and some data on those without Kjeldahl, then we can do those, and maybe it will save us a little bit of time, effort, and energy. So those are starting to deviate away from Kjeldahl a little bit, or at least alternative methods are out there for those. But Kjeldahl really in the food world is still around, and it will probably be there for quite some time in the distant future as well. The drawbacks, the reason that we don't like Kjeldahl, there are a few things that it doesn't really have going for it. Everybody's got baggage, and Kjeldahl's got baggage too, right? Maybe it was his mustache. Maybe some people don't like that mustache, and that's okay. You don't have to like mustaches. But the drawbacks here would be extreme high heat. These things have to get hot, and they have to stay hot for a long period of time. So hot, as far as temperature goes, can lead to burns, can lead to fires, can lead to injuries, and maybe a hospital trip if you are not very careful. And depending on how big these flasks are and how many you've got, you can do some damage with that. Strong acids is another drawback down here at the bottom. We are using some concentrated acids and some concentrated bases. I didn't put that, but both of those exist. So concentrated acid and concentrated base mixed with extreme high heat is not going to be user-friendly for anybody. These Kjeldahl systems can easily blow up in people's faces. And if they blow up in people's faces, that is something that you do not want to happen to you, and you don't want to be around near somebody that it does happen to. And I hope that it does not happen to anybody in our lab, but it has happened before in the past. And I've seen it firsthand. So these concentrated bases or concentrated acids get heated up to an extreme temperature and they begin to blow the top. And before you know it, acid is all over your face, all over your hair, all over your clothes, or bases can be all over your face, your hair, your clothes, the lab bench, your countertops, your shoes, and maybe the person across from you or beside of you. And I have seen people go into the bathroom and douse themselves down with water. They have went to the eye wash stations to get it all off their face. And we did have someone that did not have a change of clothes, but left immediately to go home. So that way they could take their clothes off in the car and drive home, I hope, at least partially clothed in their underwear. Hopefully they didn't get pulled over by the police. But they had to get their clothes off because it was burning and it was starting to eat through those fibers as well. Additionally, long analysis times are going to be a part of the TKN. We are looking at 1.5 to 2 hours easy for digestion alone. So just the heating, extreme high heat, concentrated acid, concentrated base, 2 hours if I'm unlucky. So there's a lot that goes into TKN, and none of that sounds very friendly. None of that sounds very pleasing to me as a lab worker. So I would want to stay away from that and choose something different if that possibility is out there, which is why some of these alternative methods do exist. However, again, food chemistry, food laboratories, Kjeldahl's where it's at. It's also another reason that instrumentation has been built into the system now. So if you get instrument like this that can do a lot of this for you, it does take care of some of the safety issues that we have. And all of these things went into consideration on the Kjeldahl method when they built these instruments. So it limits my exposure to these high heat temperatures, strong acids, strong bases, and long heat periods too at the same time. All right, so in the next video, what did I tell you? I told you, oh my God, I'm going to babble. So in the next video, we'll pick up from here and we'll talk more details about what's actually happening in the Kjeldahl reaction. So as you're heating and as you're adding reagents, what really is going on inside of those flasks, and how does it release some of this stuff that we are measuring on the back end, and how do we even measure that stuff on the back end? We've not really talked about that either. So in the next video, I'll talk more details about the Kjeldahl. So stay tuned, don't take a break, just hit play, go on into the next video. I've babbled for 40 minutes. What's another 40? I know you ain't got nothing else to do.